Well, Ben, thank you very much for joining us here on the Asian Game. It's a pleasure to have you on the show with us today. It's been about 5 weeks now since the acquisition of Kholood was announced. Take us inside that 5 weeks, if you can. How busy and hectic has that period been for you as you've sort of hit the ground running, trying to get the club and the team ready for the start of the new season?
It's been tough, and it's not because we were unprepared. We This transaction has been going on for a long time, so this was not some spur of the moment thing. We started the transaction over a year ago. We had a pretty good line of sight that this was the club we were going to take over 4 or 5 months ago. But this is unprecedented in Saudi, and I would actually contend it's unprecedented in regional history, in the sense that there's never been a private, independent, third party acquirer at the SPL level, at the first tier level. And so forget about us being foreigners. I think just even as a private citizen, because you had obviously the corporates buying club, or you had what I'd call sovereign-owned enterprises buying clubs in Saudi Arabia, and sovereign wealth funds buying clubs, and then across the rest of the region, mostly clubs are again owned by either by like a government affiliated sheikh, or by the ministries of sport themselves. So there was no precedent for this. So it certainly required a bit of writing the rule book, rewriting the regulatory guidelines, reestablishing a new legal entity, new bank accounts, and then just and then there was obviously a little bit of friction getting everyone, I think, on board on the other side of the table, in terms of, because you've got obviously the Ministry of Sport, but you've also then got the local club management who are, um, technically, I guess, indirectly Ministry of Sport employees, but were not necessarily on board, or certainly not in agreement and not aligned with what was going on at back in Riyadh. And so the net result of all of that, to your question, was a very, very short timeline for handover, for preparation of the team. We inherited a team that was already 65% fully baked. So and they're also obviously, as you know, Saudi player requirements. And so there was a modest amount of shifts we could do. I think we brought in four total foreign players to date, one still to be announced. Of those four, we changed around some of the Saudi players, but so there wasn't as much we could do to affect a different lineup, and the just an overall really complicated situation for the club. A lot of the key staff resigned at the announcement of the handover, so they kind of left us with a lot of the folks that weren't as helpful, or that we probably would not want to keep in the long term. They all the people that kind of knew and had the keys to the place ran away. Um, and then in parallel with that, all kinds of I think we were sitting on the worst infrastructure in the entire league, so it wasn't like we could just walk in turnkey and start practices. We've had to take drastic, urgent renovations around the facilities, to get them up to code. The previous management hadn't paid salaries for 6 months, so we inherited a club that was on under league sanction. It was just about to be under FIFA sanction. And so we first had to it would have been better almost to take over, I would say, an expansion franchise, because then you're kind of at least starting at zero. Here, we're starting 10 feet below the ground. So we really had to dig ourselves out of the grave first. And so it was a small miracle that we were able to field a complete squad heading into our first match last week. And thank God for the FIFA break, because that's given us time to continue squad building. And also, obviously, it's a benefit that the Saudis don't close the transfer window until the 10th. So that gives us another 7 days to squad build, um, keep adjusting the team a bit, make a few more announcements, pick over what remains in Europe, because we can still pick up players from around the world, even though their respective transfer windows have closed. So really, really a lot of pain, more than probably anticipated, but also some great things happening. This reception we received from the fans, the support we received across government, the state of the team today, I think, is pretty strong, stable, better than you would expect given the short timeline we had to put it together. I'm not crying into my soup at night, but it's not been easy.
You said this process has taken about a year, and you just listed a lot of the things that have sort of gone on behind the scenes at Al Kholood and the issues that are there. So I have to ask the question: why Al Kholood? Why did you decide to buy this football club, given the sort of litany of issues that are present at the club that you've just outlined just there?
Um, we were only offered three clubs, so it wasn't like we could pick from all 18 clubs. Four are already owned by PIF. Another two were owned by these mega projects or large state affiliated corporates. So there are only three clubs made available to us at the time in the tender, which is publicly disclosed. One was Kholood, obviously. One was called Al Oraba, which is in a city called Sakaka, kind of northern Saudi Arabia, and then one was in southern Saudi Arabia in a city called Najran, a club called Al Uqdud. Um, Al Orba got relegated, so that was an easy no. Al Uqdud actually has great infrastructure, and it's a much larger city. Our Ras, where we're based, is only about 98,000 people. Najran, where Al Uqdud is based, has about 400,000, but it's quite far from the center. It's right on the border with Yemen. Actually, the airport, while we were there, got shut down because of Houthi rockets being fired into Saudi Arabia, which is apparently a fairly common occurrence. But we really did like that club. But we chose our current club for fundamental reasons, and of course, we weren't surprised by the infrastructure. We know what we were getting ourselves into. It just made for a shorter transition, but we liked our club because one, the region where we're in is really the kind of almost like the breadbasket heartland of Saudi Arabia. Qasim, the region, is really vibrant, really affluent. Most of the biggest conglomerates and families that are now largely Riyadh based started in Al Qasim. And there's just this huge diaspora. So everywhere I go around Saudi Arabia, I'm meeting people that are saying, I'm from Qasim, I'm from Aras. So there's this whole kind of diaspora. I call them the kind of Aras mafia that I think can be activated to provide a nationwide fan base for ourselves. A little like, I don't know, you go to New York City and many of the people there are not from New York, they're from, I don't know, Texas or something. So it'd be the equivalent of like we show up with our club in New York, but there's a bunch of Texas fans that cheer us on when we're there. Um, that diaspora is actually very important and very powerful. And then we like the fact that it was kind of a newer club with a fresher history. There are lots of older incumbent clubs in Saudi Arabia that carry with them the weight of a lot of history, high achievement, fans. So our club has played once in the SPL. It finished ninth, which we think was a significant overachievement. It's not representative of what the club really was at that time. So let's say it was more of like a 13 to 15th place club that one season. Um, and it had changed its crest three times in the last, I think, couple seasons. It had, as you said, infrastructure that's starting from zero. And so if we had inherited something that had like the weight of history, a bigger fan group, existing infrastructure that already was really kind of decent but not great, it makes it a lot harder to change things about the club. And so almost by setting ourselves from scratch enabled us to think more out of the box in terms of how we're going to build our infrastructure and where we take that infrastructure physically. It meant that we could change the branding, the crest, whatever we want. I mean, at Cadiz, if I just touch the crest, the fans will murder me. Here, we changed it first day and instantly received a huge amount of support for that. We can change the way we do business. So it gave us the ability to kind of start things from scratch and have it a fresh project rather than inheriting a lot of people, infrastructure, tradition that we have to kind of unwind or build off the back of.
Yeah, it's interesting this sort of entire Saudi project. I remember chatting to the CEO of Al Ittihad, Domingos Oliveira, last season for a feature I did, and he spoke about the sort of the scale and the size of the transformation that had to take place, even at a club like at Al Ittihad when he came in. He likened it to them being a 100-year-old startup when he arrived. He spoke about, when he arrived, they didn't have a CFO, they didn't have a COO, they didn't have a football department as such, and these were all the things that he sort of had to implement from day one, had to hit the ground running, and almost had to build the ship, build the plane while they're flying it at the same time. So how quickly will you look to build out that sort of infrastructure at Kholood as well, and to get it to that international standard that you've seen at clubs like Cardiff and that around the world? How quickly are you looking to make those changes and to make that happen?
Yeah, I'm not surprised to hear that. Domingos is an amazing guy, and I've heard actually their infrastructure was really bad as well. And in fact, we're just about to kick off soon reconstruction of our infrastructure, and we're going to use a similar contractor that they used. So we should have infrastructure on par with Al Ittihad here, hopefully within the next 6 months or so. Um, uh, and I think what he experienced there is similar to us. And I've spoken also with the guys who took over all of the PIF clubs, kind of at the top, or the big four clubs at the top level. And I thought the experiences we were going through might be isolated, the kind of challenges we inherited from previous management, poor reporting, financial control. It turns out that was across the board. And of course, Domingos inherits a club that's one of the biggest clubs in the region, not just in the country. And he's obviously been able to turn it around very quickly from a performance perspective. Um, so I think we can do things very really quickly. And again, we're nimble. We're actually much more nimble than he is because I don't have to answer to anyone above me. There's no board. There's no indirect owner. There's no one. This is 100% my money, 100% my decision, my call. Means at the end of the day, the buck stops with me, and that means there's certainly a burden here, but I can move faster than he can. So, for instance, on this infrastructure side, once I have the land secured, I'm just going to start construction tomorrow. I'm not going to wait for approvals and tenders to be run with multiple bidders and some. I like a contractor. I'm going to work with him. We're done. The price is in my budget. Great. So we can move a lot faster than he can, and I think at the end of the day, that's what's actually going to set us apart from a lot of the clubs here is we can just do things others can't on a timeline they can never achieve. And so already I've been bringing in a significant overhaul of the staff. As I said, almost no one remained. So at least as it pertains to the head office, it's all going to be my new people, and we're still recruiting and interviewing as I speak. But I mean, we're talking about a month plus, not any longer, in terms of having a lot of those key roles filled by many of them high caliber Saudis. I mean, there's actually really great talent in the market, and there's a new generation of Saudis that are, you know, to the highest standards of global excellence, and so I'm really excited about having them on board. Um, so I think we're talking about months, not years. The stuff that will take years is more the fundamental infrastructure. So things like the academy, um, you know, a lot of that stuff where we've got to then we got to kind of start with a great academy director and then work down and bring in individual coaches for different age groups and different disciplines and sports science and physios and whatever. So that will take time, and again, it's been hard to bring those types of people to Saudi Arabia without paying a significant, let's call it, hardship premium. I'm hoping those days are over now, where people recognize that this is now a top five league in terms of quality of play, salary, total salary budgets, et cetera, and therefore is a good place for people to go career wise, regardless of their age. So I don't think we're years away from any of that, but definitely the academy, the infrastructure, and kind of that more grassroots part of it will take a longer timeline. I can clean out head office and have that up and running the way I'd like it within the next month or two.
Hmm. I've been following your journey in Kasim and Aras over the last couple of weeks that you've been out there, sort of introducing yourself and meeting the fans. We're speaking as you are in Boston for about 48 hours before you fly back out there again to continue that process. But what has that experience been like for you? I mean, a lot has happened. There's been the new logo, the new brand identity of the club, sort of, I guess, is the visual representation of the changeover and the changes you're looking to make at the club. But and that's pretty much been warmly received as well, from what I can gather. There's always a few critical comments on on social media, but you'll always get that. But on the whole, I think it's been warmly received. How has that process been for you on the ground in RS, getting to meet the locals, getting to meet the fans, and connect with those that are involved with the football club and around the town and around the city and the region as well?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not new to Saudi Arabia. I've been in the kingdom now almost 20 years off and on. I had never been to Aras or Qasim prior to this transaction. And so it's a new part, and most Saudis have not. When I meet most Saudis, they'd say, "I've never been there. How did you end up there? Why would you go there?" So it's like being in a rural part of America that most folks would never visit. Um, but the fans have been phenomenal, digitally and physically, and a breath of fresh air. There's a lot of toxicity in European football, and it has a much longer history, and fan bases are much more um, dissatisfied with the state of their club, and they've seen it over a much longer arc. And so, both in the digital realm as well as physically, you just get a huge amount of pushback. And I luckily I learned this lesson from a buddy of mine, who is the CEO of Mike Gordon, who's the CEO of Fenway Sports, and kind of the brains behind the turnaround at Liverpool. And he said the well of fan support is drained every night, and then you have to kind of rebuild it. So it doesn't even matter if you won the Champions League the previous year. If you're not hitting at that level, like look at Carlo over at Real Madrid. He wins the Champions League, and next year he's out, right? Um, so there's just a standard of excellence that even at the best clubs, if you don't keep hitting it day after day, you get the thorns. And so I have not experienced, and I know it's there, and I'm sure the honeymoon will wear off one day, but I've still not experienced that level of toxicity and pessimism as in Saudi Arabia as I do every day in Europe. And so that's been really refreshing, because it's really hard to get yourself up. We're working 20 hours a day right now on this club. It's really hard to get yourself up out of bed in the morning if the fans are just lacing into you online. Hatred is not a great motivator. Love is a much better motivator. So if I can sense that love and that appetite from them, that gets me much more inspired to work harder than any amount of hate would, or firefighting would. And so that's really fun. And I think it's also just because of the nature of the ecosystem in Saudi Arabia and the nature of our place in that evolutionary story. I'm allowed to, and we're allowed to do things that Saudi ownership, and certainly not presidents or chairmen, were ever able to do in the past. We're able to speak in a degree of frankness, and I'm going to release a tweet in about an hour and a half that will kind of lay bare some issues I think I see in the ecosystem that no president or chairman, I think, would ever be able to write about. And we're able to kind of reach out to them in their element, meet them physically, ask for their feedback in a way that no one has before. And so it kind of opens some floodgates, I think, of pent up frustration amongst fans, that they're able to finally vent, and someone's going to reply to them if it's a constructive commentary or constructive feedback, or criticism. They're able to speak and touch and feel in a way that they never were before, and engage. And so I think we kind of touched a nerve clearly. I mean, I think this transaction would already have been kind of interesting and unique just in its own merits, just because we're foreigners and going to a funky place in the country, and into a league that has its fair share of criticism. But I think because of I was able to kind of tap into this nerve, and get people, and address something that was really missing in the ecosystem, which was a fan ownership, fan management engagement, or relationship that has never existed before. It's opened the floodgates of interest and support in a way I never could have anticipated. And so, in spite of all the challenges we're facing, I would give this entire experience a thumbs up, because it's just been so fun to engage with these people, and we're only in the early innings. It's of course, it all comes down to how we perform on the field, and we try to set expectations very modestly for this season. But if we can survive, the world's not going to know what hits them, because we have so much support and so much momentum behind us now, that it'll be really fun if we can start picking up some wins.
So how can you harness that support that you've seen around town? I mean, we're talking about Al Kholood as a their first ever in the Saudi Pro League, averaged just over about 2,500 fans. But how do you harness that sort of the ferocity of the fans that you've experienced? How do you build on that and try and build this community around you to take this team to the heights that you want to get it to over the next few years?
Well, so let's take a step back. My history is of doing exactly this thing. Cadiz is obviously a slightly different narrative, but it's still one that, by La Liga standards, has a modest um, history in the first division. I think we're like 30th on the all-time La Liga points table, so we're not even in the top 20 of like permanent names. The highest we've ever finished in Cadiz is 12th. It's a club that has been highly regional for the most of its existence, and we were able to take that to a level over just the last 4 years since I've been around, 5 years, where we went from 500,000 social media followers to 18 million. We've had great features and documentaries made about us around the world. We've built fan bases and kind of virtual fan groups in China and Nigeria and Ghana and Turkey and elsewhere by reaching out to, again, under addressed fan groups and populations that we felt like were high growth, rather than going to the usual suspects in Europe or even North America. I intentionally didn't spend any time on North America because I know there's so much competition for eyeballs and interest there. So we did that, and we were able to get people to care about Cadiz that have no business caring about it. So, in many senses, Kholood is something similar, where it's a club that even most Saudis have never heard of, let alone anyone else outside of the country or region. And so, again, we have a blank canvas to build this narrative, to build this underdog narrative, to build this new narrative around how a club engages with its fans, how a club builds an international best practice. Level standard of quality and care for its players and fans in the midst of an evolving and fairly developing league. Um, and and it's also, Saudi Arabia is an interesting place. Our TV or our viewership numbers in the stands were low, and they're probably even lower than the number you gave. That's the official number, but I think the actual number is lower than that. But actually, as you go around the league, you find similar levels of engagement, at least physically. There's some outliers. Some of the big 4 or 5 clubs have great fan bases, but even someone like Qadisiyah, who I think is going to be one of the bigger clubs in the country on a going forward basis because of their resources, is going to struggle to attract fans, and is already the smaller club in its own city. And even the bigger club in the city, Ettifaq, which we visited last week, not a huge fan base, at least physically. I mean, you're talking, again, I think the announced attendance of that game was something like 2,000, 2,500. I think it was less than that.
Mm. What does success look like? Just thinking on the field at the moment, what does success look like for Al Khaloud, and what's realistic for you to achieve on the field? This year, next year. I mean, if we look at Saudi Arabia, there's the big six as it is now. You've got the four clubs owned by the PIF. Plus, you've got Qadsiya and Neom that's joined them this year. Al Daria and Al Ula will almost certainly join them next season as well. Then sort of next rung down, you've got the likes of Al Shabab and Ettifaq as well. So what goals do you have on field for this season and next season as well? And I guess how will you define success within that context for a club like Al Khaloud?
Clearly, I can't win a spending war or arms race with the PIF clubs, nor the 4 big mega project clubs, Duria, Ula, Neom, and Qadisiyah. And so that means that it's, eight of the 18 clubs are already significantly more resourced than we are. And then there's a lot of other great clubs in there that have history of winning the league, or significant fan bases and resources, be it Town, Shabab, even Fateh, who've won the league before, and people point to as kind of one of those Cinderella stories, a little bit like um, a, 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 a little bit like a Leicester City. And so I think the way we compete is, one. having the best quality kind of infrastructure in the league. And like I said, I think we can achieve that by being kind of one of the newer, most modern facilities, and we'll have one on par with the big four. We'll have it in a location I think is really appealing to players to come work for us. Two is having just the best quality coaching and training. We understand that a lot of these big clubs, even though they pay high salaries, players kind of show up into a dusty training facility. They have kind of poor medical care. They have to kind of pay for their own medical out of pocket, poor nutrition, physio, whatever. So if we can kind of provide that Western standard quality of care around the players and their bodies, I think that will give us a bit of an edge in terms of recruiting players. We, of course, will use data science in a way that I think a lot of the other clubs are not. And so that gives us a bit of an edge where they are more human centric. And then again, the fact that we are a single owner club gives us the ability to be a much more responsive to players' needs. And we don't have anyone to blame. So if the players have an issue, they can come to me directly. It just makes for a much more clear communication, and a stable environment. A lot of these other bigger clubs, we've seen a huge amount of turnover in the ranks between. Um, uh, at the administrator level, most of the big four clubs hired and fired CEOs over the last year and a half. So we have that stability where you're going to have the same, no one can fire me in essence, right? So we're going to have the same administrators, we're going to have the same coaches, and so I think that stability. Western institutional management of the club infrastructure gives us a fighting chance to attract the best players, and then we use data science and other kind of I think more advanced forms of scouting and player identification than others, rather than just overpaying for top names in the market. And then finally, as I think I've said previously, we need to be a talent generator, not a buyer. And so we've got to find ways to improve that academy. And again, I think our chances are good. Maybe Daria and a couple others are doing a good job on the academy front, but I think we can outperform most of the rest of the league on attracting the best of Saudi and global youth talent to our facilities, and then developing them in a really cohesive kind of career trajectory, as opposed to some of these bigger clubs in our market who can just afford to buy talent rather than develop it. And so I think all of those give us a fighting chance. And I like the dynamics of our league, honestly. I still think a lot of the big name clubs buy players for profile or brand name rather than for cohesive fit within a clear kind of system. And we'll see how it plays out. This season will tell a lot whether we're right or wrong about this, but I think we've put together a pretty cohesive club where we could. Again, we've inherited 50-60% of it that we didn't have control over, but I think we put together a pretty good squad for our salary level, and hopefully that'll outperform against big clubs that have a much higher salary budget, much bigger stars, but are kind of disconnected. I learned this lesson. I've said it a few times early in my experience with SPL, when I saw a club called Al Ahly from Egypt, which is a really great club, one of the best clubs in all of Africa, but certainly not one with nowhere near the resources of an Al Ittihad. Just absolutely work Al Ittihad in the Club World Cup a couple years ago in Jeddah, because they knew how to play together and they knew how to pass and share and move and had a system, rather than, you know, Benzema trying to run off and do some hero play on his own or someone else. So we will always be a club that favors system and strategy over name.
Yeah, that was certainly a poor Etihad side. Just a couple to finish off with, if I can. There's been some change to the football department since you've come in. You've brought in Des Buckingham as your new coach. Someone I've interviewed before, fantastic guy, really knows his stuff. So I'm sure he'll do really well there. You spoke before about the transfer window that closes in about a week. It might even be exactly a week from when we're speaking on the 10th, I think it is. How and I saw you're linked with a player from Orlando City, Ramiro Enrique, as well. How busy and how hot is your phone at the moment with agents and the like trying to get their players to your club, and how busy do you expect to be over the next week trying to sort of complete the puzzle of your squad for this season?
Yeah. On the coaching side, we're really happy with Des. Obviously, there was no coach in, so the coach from previous season, who I think did a good job of keeping the club alive and up and finishing well. He left before we came on board. The previous management had kind of wanted to take the coaching search in another direction, but we were pretty firm and had kind of settled on Des. Prior to taking over the club, we think he's a good fit for what we needed, which was a young entrepreneurial coach who's worked under challenging kind of physical conditions. Being the coach of Al Kholood is not being the coach of Al Ittihad or Al Ahly. This is a job, as I said, it's much more around like a startup. Horrific infrastructure, a tough part of the country for a Westerner to kind of live in. And so we needed someone like Des who'd worked and lived in, say, Mumbai, under the conditions he faced there. He's also a coach that, again, fits within our system, the way we select players, the way we want to play, rather than maybe an older, more mature coach who would very much impose his will and system on the club. Yeah, we're certainly very busy. We just got off a call with the full team. I'm obviously trying to stay a little bit away from this. I think when owners get too directly involved in the day to day of a transfer window, especially one like myself who has some football experience, but certainly by no means one that I think is up there with the best, and certainly a shorter period. I lean heavily on our sporting director, our scouting teams. We have a great CEO we've brought on board that we've not publicly announced, at the group level, who's heavily involved, and so they're leading the charge. But no, you'll see more action from us. You'll see, at least I would say 3 to 5 more player announcements by the end of the window. Most of those skewing more towards Saudi players because we've just about hit our limit on foreign players. But we're still hunting around and working with all the other clubs in the region, particularly in Saudi Arabia, because our objective is to be the place where Saudi national team caliber players that maybe aren't getting playing time on their current clubs can come. And so we're going to always have a busy kind of second half of the transfer window once the European closes, to see who now, with the dust settled in Saudi Arabia, would be attractive for us to pick up and would be mutually beneficial for their home clubs. So no, so expect more action from our side over the coming days.
And then final one from me, as I mentioned, the first foreign owner of a club in Saudi Arabia. But as this sort of privatization push continues, I'm sure you won't be the last. So as the league does sort of go down this path of privatization and more clubs come into that, fall under that sort of umbrella of privatization, especially to to more foreign entities. And as I'm sure you the last, and there's all the benefits that you bring with with different expertise and different ideas. How will that sort of reshape Saudi football and the Saudi Pro League? Do you think?
Well, I actually don't like to play up the whole fact that I'm the first foreign owner. That's why I think it's almost more important to say I'm the first independent, purely financially, commercially driven, non-government affiliated owner in the league's history, and that's much more important than the fact that I'm foreign. It doesn't matter. And there were two other owners that obviously came in with us at the same time, but they bought lower tier clubs. So at least I have the designation of being that at the SPL level and at the first tier level. Um, I think regardless of nationality, and I think it will skew more Saudi still. My kind of understanding is that people that are waiting in the wings to take over some of the other clubs are large families or well experienced people within the media space or elsewhere, but mostly Saudi. I think it's all good news for the league. The problem we have right now is we have. If I'm the only financially driven team and the only one where the buck financially stops with me personally, and I'm competing against 4 to 8 clubs at the top who have no financial accountability for their management, are able to buy a player for 80 million and sell him for 20, don't care about what the P&L looks like at the end of the year in a really material way. It's going to crush clubs like mine. And I hear other club presidents, because they talk to me. I've reached out to all club presidents in the league, I think, and the ones that I've already met with in person or on phone have been, A, very supportive and really wonderful, welcoming people, but B, quietly beneath their breath, kind of talking about this pain that we all deal with, which is the inflationary pricing that is a result of the prices being paid at the top. And so just because Al Ahly or Al Nasser can pay some guy an ungodly price doesn't mean the rest of us can do that. And yet those players come to us with dollar signs in their eyes, expecting some kind of a Saudi premium for coming to the league. So we've got to cut that Saudi premium out immediately, and certainly cut out anything that would be considered like a hardship premium. And we need to kind of, as a cartel, force prices downward. We need to act as one united league to force prices downward, not up. We can't have this disparity where we're all at the bottom getting dragged by the top. So I think privatization can only be a good thing, because hopefully it brings down the spending at the top, or reins that in and makes that much more financially accountable. And that will actually create more parity in the league. It'll help us bring ourselves up, bring them kind of not down, but at least like in a more reasonable realm. And so I think privatization is was a visionary move by the Crown Prince and the Minister of Sport. And I think it's a perfect initiative to ensure the long-term sustainability of this league, because you see other regional leagues around us, like the United Arab Emirates. You've got some good teams at the top there who've done decently well in, in say Asian Champions League competitions. But I mean, you go to the stands, there's like 100 people in the arenas. The national team hasn't done well in international competitions. I don't know if they've ever qualified for the World Cup. Um, and so you need a private sector approach to football to force it to be accountable, to be sustainable, and to work at the highest levels of professionalism. And I think that only happens really through privatization. So I hope they accelerate the privatization process, and I think they will. I think people having we now broken the ice here, and to some degree we're paving the road for future privatizations with our own sweat and blood. So I hope I hope someone gives us a thank you note someday for it. But definitively, I think our story has already awakened the world to how attractive this league is, and the financial opportunities here, and just the demand for football in Saudi Arabia. And so I think that we won't have a problem of attracting further and future investors to the kingdom. It'll be a matter of ensuring they're the right types that understand the conditions in the kingdom, its culture, its religion, its people, its history. Don't think they can just come in like a bull in a china shop and smash things up. I think in some ways I was the perfect first owner for them, because I have experience running a club in Europe under similar conditions, being a smaller financial player against big boys, and competing well, taking a club that's unknown to the world, having spent 20 years in Saudi Arabia. So I know how world football should work. I also know how Saudi Arabia should work, and does work at its core. Hopefully, we can find people with a similar profile for future acquisitions that don't come in and try to just blow everything up, and not take into careful consideration what really can be done, what can't be done, and how to appeal to local fans and government officials, and just knows all the complexities of operating in a market like Saudi Arabia.
Absolutely. Ben, thank you very much. You've been incredibly generous with your time tonight. I was going to say enjoy the break over the international break, but I'm sure you won't get much of a break as you continue building this club out. And the good thing is, after this international break, things should get a little bit easier, because you've only got Al Nasser afterwards. So I'm sure that'll be a nice, easy one for you. But no, very best of luck. It's a fascinating project, and one we'll be watching very closely with interest, and I'm sure our listeners will too. So thank you very much for joining us, and best of luck for not only this season, but the seasons ahead as you build out this project as well.
Wonderful. Thanks for your time, Paul.